Kids Book Fest takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded indigenous territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee Nation. The festival highlights the voices of authors, storytellers, and illustrators from across the country who are important and deserve to be heard. They've taken their time to create art, and now they're here to share with you.
So what will you do with what you hear and learn? How can you use the lessons you learned today and throughout the year to be a leader in your community? Wherever you're watching this event, we hope that you find it engaging and thought-provoking. We hope that at Fold Kids Book Fest, you witness and experience the incredible power of stories.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ardo, and I'm the kids coordinator at Fold, and I'm very excited to be your host for today's panel conversation. This event will run for about 60 minutes. And of course, we wouldn't have these fantastic events without the support of our sponsors who make Fold Kids Book Fest happen. And we also wouldn't be able to have this event without the authors and moderator who are a part of it. So it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Gord Hill is an Indigenous writer, artist, and activist of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. He is the author and illustrator of the Antifa comic book, Revised and Expanded. Uma Krishnaswami is a British Columbia-based author of 27 books. The Sunshine Project is her middle grade novel and third book in the Bookhangle trilogy. And Charlene Rocha is a activist and software engineering student at the University of Waterloo. You Can Be an Activist is her middle grade nonfiction book. And finally, but definitely not least, our moderator tonight is Alyssa Gray-Tyghter. Alyssa is an educator, storyteller, equity-centered leader who designs spaces where people feel seen, valued, and connected. Please welcome our panel.
Thank you, Ardo, and welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be your moderator for this session. And since we only have an hour, we're going to jump right into questions. The first question for our panel, tell us a little bit about your book and the impetus behind it. And so we're going to go with Charlene first, and then Uma, and then Gord, if that works. So yeah, go right ahead.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Charlene. And my book is called You Can Be an Activist, written by me, Mary Beth Leatherdale, and illustrated by Drew Shannon. And yeah, the reason why we wrote this book is because we noticed that there was so many resources surrounding activism and how students can get more involved in their community. But what there did lack was a comprehensive guide to sort of point kids who had all of these passions and talents and ideas and sort of guide them in a very kind of concrete way. So what we did is we put together this book that is packed with resources, it's packed with stories, and it kind of goes along my journey into activism and how I kind of started with being active within my own school community and kind of turned that into protesting and lobbying my local government and kind of now using my software engineering skills to contribute to my activism. And alongside my own journey, we kind of go through some historical activists as well that are lesser known throughout history, and also some interviews with other activists in our community. But yeah, our overall goal was to just give kids a tool that would help them create their own kind of activism journey as they're reading along and think about how they want to start taking next steps in their communities.
And it's amazing, great for not only students, but for educators as well. Like it's a great tool to have in your classroom because it functions kind of as a how-to book, which is great. Uma, on to you.
Yeah, so the Sunshine Project is the third book, as Ardo said, in the Bookhangle trilogy. And so what I really should do is tell you the impetus behind the first book, because that explains how all of the stories came to be. So this was way back in 2009 or so. And I was visiting my parents who lived in India at the time. And I was out walking, and on the sidewalk, the bricks in the sidewalk were kind of broken. And there was a little girl sitting there, and she was cross-legged and she was reading a book. And the people were walking around her. There was traffic going by on the road. There were people chattering away at the bus stop, horns honking. She was ignoring all of them and she was just reading. And I thought, there's a story there. I wonder what it is. There was also an election going on at the time. And really, just as a mental exercise, I thought to myself, what if I put those two things together? And that was how Book Uncle and Me came to be. And then, fast forward to the pandemic, I was doing a virtual program, and somebody said, "Are you going to write a sequel?" And I thought, I don't know, should I? And then the idea didn't leave me alone. So that is how the next two books came to be.
Thank you. And also like a great middle grade read. It's super short. It's great for lit circles or a novel study if you choose. So educators, you'll also love that. And Gord, on to you.
So I guess the Antifa comic book, the impetus was Trump was running his first presidential campaign in 2016, and there was a very large expansion of the far right and fascist organizing in the United States. And my publisher, Arsenal Pulp Press, asked me if I'd like to do an Antifa comic book about the history of fascism and the history of anti-fascism. And so that's how that book came about. My other book, The 500 Years of Indigenous Resistance, I was originally doing these as short comics when I was in the Native Youth Movement. So I would do like a short comic about historical events like the Oka crisis and whatever. And I would, they were like 4 to 8 page comics on 8 by 11 pages. And I would go, whenever we went, I was working with the Native Youth Movement, and whenever we went to a conference or a powwow, I just had to get access to a photocopier and I could produce these zines. And after a while, I had a collection of those. And so I brought those down to Arsenal. And that was the first comic I had published, was the 500 Years of Resistance. And that was basically a history of the colonization of the Americas and indigenous resistance to it.
Thank you. And also, I love this book for high school classrooms, especially educators. We talk about often how textbooks just don't do what we want them to do. And a comic book is a great way to engage students. So highly recommend for all age levels. All right, moving on to question 2. Each of you writes books that are very heavily rooted in social justice. And can you think of a teacher, a mentor, an elder, someone who helped spark your sense of justice? And what did they do to make you feel that doing the right thing mattered? So this time we'll go with Uma first, then Gord, then Charlene.
Okay, I have to think a little about that one because in a big screen kind of way, I grew up in India, and it was the land of Gandhi, and the country was only 9 years old when the year that I was born. So you can see I've been doing this work for a really long time. But his influence was huge. But it was iconic, and it was sort of elevated. Everything was on a pedestal and out of reach. And it wasn't until I think I was in about grade 9 or so. And we had a teacher who was really invested in social justice issues and poverty issues. And she really got me thinking about doing work in the neighborhood, collecting food during the holidays, collecting money for causes that the students had to come up with. It was not a usual way of teaching at the time, and I think it really made an impression on me.
I love that you say that it wasn't a usual way of teaching, and I think that's a really important piece for teachers to hold on to, and that like all of these outside the box things that you're trying, they're reaching somebody. Gord, go ahead.
I can't really say there was any single person or a mentor or anything. I um, I became involved in different social movements, and that was what really inspired me to research and write and learn more because I wanted to understand how these different conditions had arose. So the first group I became involved with was an El Salvadoran Solidarity Committee, and at the time El Salvador was engaged in a civil war and there was a revolutionary movement. So I started studying about El Salvador, what was the history, why did they have a civil war going on and stuff like that. The thing that kind of radicalized me was actually punk music because I was listening to punk on a radio station in Vancouver, and I was actually in the Army Reserve at the time. So twice a week I would go down to military training, but then I was listening to all this punk, and I just started kind of looking at what I was doing and the people I was around, and kind of listening to punk, and it just kind of made me more aware of the world and stuff that was going on. And I didn't, and I that was going to be my career, was I was actually going to join the military, but listening to punk kind of radicalized me and made me take a very different path. And yeah, that's kind of what happened to me.
I do love that as well, because that, like, for teachers, there is a Gord in your class somewhere that maybe it's not you, but maybe they're doing their own research and they're learning on their own. So how do we continue to foster learning and radicalization on these amazing fronts? And punk music is great. So I usually have a question about music that I might have to slide in here now that you've mentioned that. Charlene, go ahead.
Yeah. So what came to mind for me initially was sort of two educators that I could think of in my life who, though I've had so many amazing educators, these kind of small, minor things that they said to me really kind of stuck with me. So the first one is I had an educator tell me, because when I was in middle school, I was very introverted. And I feel like my personality right now doesn't super match that, but I was always afraid to kind of speak my mind. And I had so many ideas, but didn't think that they were good enough to voice. So I was very scared of speaking out and participating in class and things like that. And I had an educator who, I guess, rather than shame me for being introverted and push me outside of my comfort zone in ways that I wasn't necessarily comfortable with, they kind of got down to my level and explained to me that you have so many of these good ideas that are going unheard, and explained to me the significance of the fact that I wasn't speaking up and speaking out. So that kind of helped me understand on a deeper level why I needed to kind of sit with why I was scared to speak up. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I kind of have that sense of justice now, to be like, I truly believe this way and I feel this way, and I'm going to say that because it doesn't matter. Yeah, and then the other educator that I thought of was as I was sort of working within advocacy, this educator we worked really closely with throughout these movements. And to give you what we were working on specifically, within my municipality, we were trying to lobby our local government along with our school's Black History team. And we had just faced like a major loss where we were trying to get the government to do something, and they had essentially turned it down after months of working on it. And we were all like so bummed, so bummed. And this educator was reminding us that though we were really upset by this major loss, we needed to kind of take the steps to recognize the accomplishments that we had made along the way. Like, our group had expanded greatly. A lot of us had not done municipal government lobbying at that point, and we learned so much about that process. We now knew what we were going to do for next time and what we eventually did for next time to help us get that win. So it was things like that that sort of stuck with me, because I have to remember that a loss is just kind of us learning from our mistakes, and that celebrating along the way is what helps us kind of form that basis for advocating.
Charlene, it sounds like you had amazing teachers. Because
Very
being
good.
able to have those conversations with students is hard, right? Especially
Yeah.
when you're facing something like a loss and we have to rally and say, okay, but how do we keep going? So I think that's amazing for you all. Okay, my next question for you. Why is it important that books for young readers reflect the complexity of the world they're growing up in rather than shielding them from it? Because often there are books that just kind of we glaze over all of these really important issues, but we know that students today are living in the worlds that you have talked about in your books. So we'll start with Gord, and then we'll go Charlene, and then Uma. So Gord, go ahead.
I think it's important because that's the world that they're living in, and it's important to be aware of what's going on in the world, especially now with I think there's like a lot of crises going on, impending crises, and a lot of change and conflict is going on. So I think it's better for young people to be prepared for that rather than to be ignorant of what's going on and not understand how society functions and how the society we're living in impacts other parts of the world. So I think I just think it's like common sense to talk about what's going on in the world today. And history is an important part of that because it explains how we came to be in the world that we're living in today. So I think history and current events are intertwined, and I think they're very important subjects that should be, studied.
Absolutely. Charlene, did I say you were next? Hopefully I did.
Yeah.
See what I mean? It always goes back and forth, but Charlie, go ahead.
No, you got it. You got it. Yeah, completely agree with what Gord said. I think that if our students are already experiencing it, they're already going to have questions about it, opinions about it, and want that platform to discuss it. And I think doing that in a safe space like a classroom is a great example of how we can sort of push them to question the things that they're being told and to identify them in a better way. And I think a great example of why shielding them from that is not good is because it also puts us in sort of a kind of naive perspective almost, where if we use things like AI as an example, we don't want educators to assume students aren't using AI because then they don't know the harms of it. Um, Especially as somebody who's in software engineering, when I know and understand the complexities behind how biased AI can be, like if we ask it to describe what a doctor looks like, it'll most likely tell us or give us a picture of a white man. So I think assuming students are using these tools and exposed to the things that are always not always so great in the world allows us to give them examples of why those tools aren't always the greatest and not shame them for using those things, but to help them understand and kind of prepare themselves for how they can be wary of them in the future.
I agree. It opens up great conversations.
Yeah.
Uma, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I can add to this is that children do live in the same world that we're in, and they are not blind to injustices around us. Children, in fact, often have an inbuilt sense of fairness in their daily lives. The thing that I feel makes this so much more urgent today is that there is just so much disinformation around and so much misinformation. And it's very easy for young people to get incomplete information and make poor choices based on that. And the other thing, which is sort of turning this argument on its head, is that as grown-ups, we haven't done a great job in how we've taken care of this world. And it is a world that we are going to leave to the next generation. So as writers, I really do feel a responsibility to deal with these issues on the page in ways that are going to be empowering and not threatening to young people.
And I think that's a great point that you raise, because I think as educators, sometimes we kind of struggle with that and struggle with how to have those conversations. So if we look at, each of your identities, which clearly inform the work that you're doing, right? Like there is something very personal about all of this work. So how do your cultural identities and lived experiences shape the way you approach writing about difficult or political topics for young people? And so this time we'll go, I don't even know where we are anymore, but let's go Charlene, Uma, Gord again. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I do think that because the topics that we're all writing about are so personal to us, either they think they're things that we've experienced. For my book especially, I talk specifically about a lot of personal experiences, and that fueled the reasons behind why I was writing and what I wanted my readers to learn from it as well. But yeah, it definitely shapes the way that I wanted to write about these things because I wanted people to understand the topics that I was discussing, not just in some distant way of, oh, this happens to some people, but to understand this is happening to people in our communities. So, to give an example, within the book, we specifically tackle one section which talks about microaggressions, and it talks about what to do when people are questioning the why behind your social justice issue. So this is sort of later on in the book, once the reader has sort of crafted an idea of or ideas of things that they would like to kind of work on regarding social justice issues. And I mean, personally, for me, I've had so many people approach me and not always agree with the things that I'm advocating for, though I agree with and want to pursue it so deeply. We're always going to have those people who, throw off those comments or say things. So I specifically wanted to include, what if you have that family member at the dinner table that's questioning you? How do you decide when it's helpful or useful to defend your opinion and to stand up for yourself? Or also for things like social media. We also had a section discussing how you deal with social media comments if you feel like they're negative. And I specifically talked about a time when I had gone viral on Twitter after some protests that I did, and people were in the comments calling me a terrorist. And it's situations like that that make it so important for me to tell kids that when they're experiencing things like that, or if they experience things like that, how they can sort of protect themselves and make sure that they are doing things in the best way possible for them.
I love that. And absolutely agree with everything you've said so far. Uma, did I say you were? I'm already doing this. I got to start writing this down. Uma, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't remember either, but I can chime in. This really goes back to why I started writing in the first place. As a child growing up in India, I was a young writer. I would read books and write in response to them. And yet I never, ever thought that I could ever do this with my life, right? Because I had never seen a child like myself in a book. It was not just that no one in my family wrote books or no one I knew wrote books, but the characters, those role models were just not there. And so I was living in the United States at the time, and it just became, I had a young child, I had a small child at home, and I thought, I have to do this because here is a brown child growing up in North America, and what am I going to point him to? Not Rudyard Kipling. So that's why I started writing. For these books, I very much wanted to portray an urban image of India and children in a city that was not stereotypical, because there was still through the 80s and the 90s and into the 2000s, I was seeing so much stereotyping going on in the literature, especially in the United States, and less so in Canada. But it just felt important to do that, and to give these children agency, and make them characters who could take action within their communities.
I love that. Meaningful representation matters. It's not just about having a particular face in a book, but it's how they're represented that really matters. And I think that's an important piece to remember. And Gord, how about you?
Yeah, so growing up as an Indigenous person living on and off reserve, I really had no comprehension of colonialism or the history of how we came to be living on the reserve. And when I became involved in Native social movements, I wanted to, first I wanted to understand the historical process that put us in these social conditions. And I wanted to share that history with other Indigenous people, because I really agree with Frantz Fanon's thing that you want to write for your people. So that's my most important target audience, is Indigenous people with the Indigenous comic book. Oh, with the anti-fascist comic book, it's to me, it's an important history. It shows examples of anti-fascist resistance, and I think it helps understand the history of fascism, how it arose, and all that. But again, it's kind of like for anti-fascists to use as an organizing tool to spread information, educate, public education, and stuff like that. But definitely being Indigenous. I mean, I wasn't really that involved in anything indigenous until after the Oka crisis, because that was really inspiring to see your people stand up and resist in such a forceful manner. And so that's what really set me on the path in being involved in indigenous social movements. And then a lot of my years, I've been involved in social movements, organizing protests and marching and organizing events and stuff like that. So that kind of feeds into both the books because I've been involved in these movements, and so I want to portray them as well, so that other people can be inspired by them or learn from them.
There's something that you said right in the very beginning, when you were talking about the fact that, as an Indigenous person, just because I'm Indigenous, it doesn't mean that I had all of this information kind of going into writing, right? It wasn't until after the Oka crisis that you really started getting involved. And I think that's a key piece for educators, because what we tend to do nowadays, especially in classrooms, is that we look at an identity, or we assume that a child has a particular identity. And then we say, tell us everything you know about your identity. And maybe they don't have the information that we want them to have. And so having books like this in the classroom is a great way for them to see themselves represented. Maybe they don't have the history that you're looking for. And maybe this is a window for them as well. So keeping books like these in your classrooms is a fantastic way to kind of open the world to students, even if you think they might know already. So keeping on the topic of educators and caregivers, and I'm both. I'm a mom and an educator. And we worry about getting it wrong a lot of the time, right? So what guidance do you have for adults who feel hesitant or underprepared to have complex conversations? And let's go with Uma, then Gord, then Charlene.
Sure. So I think the first thing to do is to listen to where young people are and where they're coming from, because that's when we could even begin to understand what it is they need in terms of these conversations that are really imperative in our time. I come at this very much as from my writer self. I don't have a background in activism or in education, certainly not education of young children, but I have taught adults who want to write for children. And I think it's really, really important to begin to listen to young people's voices. We have amazing, amazing voices of young people in our world today. And we might begin by listening right there. If we think back to the climate strikes, they were the thing that brought the entire climate crisis into the headlines and into the forefront of international conversations. Young people today are suing their governments around the world, claiming correctly, in my opinion, that their governments have not lived up to protecting their rights in terms of the climate crisis, that they have not done enough to mitigate the effects. So I think we have already incredible voices, incredible stories coming out from among young people that we would all do well to pay attention to. But listen and frame questions that children and youth can investigate for themselves so that they can find the answers, they can be part of finding the answers, because we certainly don't have all of them.
Absolutely. And Gord, what about you? How do we have these complex conversations?
I would say, first of all, you should prepare yourself and do some study and research or something to have a better understanding of this, whatever complex conversation you're going to have, because kids today have a lot more access to information, and I think it depends on their group and that, but they can be really aware of what's going on in the world. They might be quite aware of what the Trump regime is about in the United States. So I would say prepare, because they may know more about some of these things than you do, or they may know more than you think they do. Just because of the access of information is so broad nowadays. And Yeah, keep it somewhat simple. If it's if it's depending on the age, if it gets too complex, it's going to be hard for a young child to follow what you're talking about. But yeah, I would say just prepare yourself.
Agreed. Charlene, what about you?
Yeah, I would first say if you're ever in a situation where somebody's coming to you with a complex question, that's already a great position to be in, that they feel comfortable enough to ask you something that they're unsure of. And I would say, because I can think of so many times where I've asked educators questions and either I can tell that they're trying to figure out the answer or they just don't know and are lying and making something up. But I think it's totally fine to not know something. And I think the expectation, or almost like the model you want to give, is that it's okay to not know something and it's almost welcomed because then you have this opportunity to learn something more. So I would say, yeah, it's totally fine to not know and to say you don't know and to either take the time to research it yourself and come back to them with answers in a kind of simplified or a simplified way, or to even take that as an opportunity to do research with them. I remember this one time, when I was in elementary school, I went to a Catholic school and somebody had asked a question about queer rights. They didn't know what LGBT stood for, and they asked the teacher. Teacher had no idea. And I remember in class, the teacher was Googling it with us and was teaching us about the acronym as they were learning about the different terms. And that was something that stuck with me because they weren't afraid to say, I don't know, and to kind of take that step back and show us how to research it. And then to question and to not only have their own questions, but vocalize their own questions and open the space for questions as well. So yeah, I think that totally fine to not know, and to take that as an opportunity to learn for yourself and for the student that's asking.
I love that both you and Gord talked about this idea of like learning more and being okay with, like sitting in discomfort and knowing that maybe you don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
Because as much as we'd love to believe that we do, we know that we don't. And so I love also the idea of researching with your students because you're modeling the skills that they need in order to be successful, which is amazing. Again, I think Charlene, you've had amazing teachers. So shout out to whoever Charlene's teachers are because they've been doing great work. Um,
Alyssa,
so
can I jump in on that?
yeah, please
I
do.
just want to say one other thing to keep in mind is that children often have really good inbuilt untruth detectors, shall we call them? And I think we should all be aware of that and not be afraid to therefore show that we don't really have all the answers.
Uma, you are 100% right. My kids can tell when I'm lying, just like I can tell when they're lying. And they'll be like, "Mommy, I don't know if that's right. I don't think you're being honest." So, coming at it from a very like, I'm not sure perspective, or, maybe simplifying the conversation until, you can have deeper conversations. I think it's also okay to say, like, you know what, your age, here's what I'm comfortable sharing. Maybe as you grow, we'll give you more information. There's so many different ways to tackle it. And speaking of, learners and students and children, the next question is, what do you think young people today already understand that adults often underestimate? Because I think children know a lot. And as adults, we're like, no, we have all the answers. We have no answers. And when they figure us out, no, I'm kidding. But yeah, what do you think young people today already understand that adults often underestimate? Gord, we'll go Gord first, then Charlene, then Uma.
I think in general, I think they understand the climate crisis better than a lot of adults. Maybe because they're just, they're observing what's going on, and maybe they're concerned about their future, whereas adults or older people either deny it or they're just kind of apathetic about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think climate crisis, number one, students seem to just understand. They get it. We've told them what's happening, and they're like, "Yeah, how do we fix it? How do we make this better?" It's the adults that are the problem. Charlene, go ahead.
Yeah, when you first said this question, I sort of took it in a pessimistic way where I kind of understood it as what do young people understand that is almost bad to understand or to learn about? And to give you an example of what I mean, I was thinking of the situation where we oftentimes assume if a kid doesn't directly have a social media account or their own phone or their own device or free access to the internet, that they're then shielded to all of the sort of bad opinions or misinformation. And I think that that's just not the truth at all. I think the second that kids are put into social circles, they're talking with people who may have been exposed to it directly or hearing opinions of people who are exposed to things. And especially with the growth of things like the red pill movement, it's important to have those discussions and assume that kids are going to be exposed to it or have already been exposed to it. So I think taking a very pessimistic approach when having a lot of these conversations and talking about things like misinformation and how to find bias in certain statements is so, so, so important and critical. Because a lot of the times, if it's the only opinion they've heard, it's what they'll believe. So yeah, I think that young people today understand a lot of opinions that are kind of circulating in the media. And maybe that's not a good thing. And maybe we would like to do some more education around that.
I couldn't agree with you more. My kids all have flip phones. They're 12 and under, so they don't have access to social media, but I am surprised by the amount of information
Yeah.
they have access to just via their friends,
Yeah.
via other things that are happening. So as much as we try to shield them, yeah, you're right. Like they know a lot.
They'll find a way.
Yeah, they and Uma, what about you? What do you think young people today already understand that adults underestimate?
Well, I will tell you something that happened when my granddaughter, who is now 4, was I guess 3. She was 3 at the time, and Trump was campaigning, and they live in Colorado. And she apparently looked at the TV one day and she said, "Daddy, I don't like that man." And that was just like, that was like, no, there was no conversation about it. It was just, So it led me to feel like there were instincts there that really needed nurturing. But I also think, jokes aside, that they do understand the climate crisis in some ways better than those of us whose entire lives have not been lived within a decaying climate. So, I can look back and compare what I know now to what I knew in my youth. But for a 10-year-old, they've lived their entire life in the shadow of this thing. And to them, it's part of what it is to be a human on this planet. And I think that's a different kind of understanding. I think that's also true of political sensitivities. I think they also, this is a generation coming up that has the potential for tremendous understanding across races and cultures. That they have had many, many children in urban, suburban areas in particular, have had exposure to lots of different kinds of people. That has its downside in some places if they're also exposed to prejudice, but it also has a tremendous potential for fellowship and understanding.
Agreed. And I love again that you and Gord highlighted the importance of like the climate crisis and children just understanding almost innately because this is the world they've grown up in, versus some of us older folks having to unlearn and relearn. And staying on the topic of young people, when you think about the world that young people are inheriting, I can't even speak anymore. What excites you the most and what concerns you the most? And I'm going to throw it right back to you because I feel like you were already kind of there. So we'll go Uma, Gord, and then Charlene.
I think what excites me, I would say what gives me hope. I'm not particularly excited about a whole lot these days for lots of different reasons. But what gives me hope is that there is the ability to communicate. And I understand that the very things that gave us those powers also have come with tremendous disadvantages as well. And they are tools, they are very powerful tools, and they have the potential to be used for human good, and the good of the planet, and they have the potential to be grossly abused. And we're seeing both things play out in real time. So that is both hopeful, and it gives me a reason to feel optimistic and to keep on writing for children. Um, the things that concern me are, those very things that AI could bring us all down. Climate will almost certainly, I think, have effects for generational effects. What we choose to do with that, even during whatever's left of my life, that will be up to younger people. And I see hope there, because young people do have energy, and if we can give them the tools and the knowledge and the ability to work together, that's how we're going to make good happen in the world.
I love all of that sentiment. Gord, what about you?
Oh, um, well, what excites me uh, is seeing the status quo that we've had maybe since the end of World War II is now being destabilized, and seeing the decline of the U.S. empire excites me, and the potential for a great social change as a result of all these crises, that excites me. And then that's also the my biggest concerns about the future is these great societal changes that I feel we're kind of on the verge of, and which will bring tremendous change, but will have a lot of very negative consequences for people as well. But for me, the system we're living under is so oppressive and exploitative and ultimately self-destructive. It has to be ended in order for life to continue on this earth. So it excites me to see it in decline, but it's a very dangerous time in that sense. And there's a lot of existential threats that we're facing as society. And yeah, it's really a time to be aware and conscious of what's going on in the world, I feel.
Gord, you almost made that sound really exciting, like this possibility that like
It is.
the whole
I'm a
system.
apocalyptimist is the term, that you see great potential in these kinds of changes that are occurring even now. So
I do love that because it reframes it for us, right? It reframes it for students as well. Like, what can we do now that we're not being held by this system? Like, what changes can we make? Which is perfect for Charlene to kind of jump into with, her activist lens.
Yeah, I was gonna say what I think is the most exciting about the world is the fact that we obviously have more opportunity for the students, but I think that that opportunity has also in turn kind of given them boldness. I mean, I thought Gen Z was already filled with people being bold and not afraid to speak their minds. And then I see Gen Alpha and it's on a different level. So I get more and more excited about the fact that I'm seeing so many young people kind of take that step and say, I'm not tolerating what I'm being given and I'm not okay with it. And I mean, that in itself is so inspiring. But I think on the same side of it, I've also had so many conversations with people who are bold, but it's because they're so fearful. Their entire lives they've lived with this kind of impending doom that they just feel sometimes like, what's the point? If we were given this world that's already so flawed and there's so many problems and issues, how can we do anything about it? There's always going to be something that's wrong with it. So that is one thing that scares me about the world, makes me concerned, is because I do see a lot of that general, like, people just being discouraged and not wanting to do anything about it. And I think that's where a lot of these issues kind of fall, is when people feel like those small actions can't actually turn into bigger, impactful actions. And that lack of action can be really, really scary. But yeah.
I think all of those are amazing kind of like hopes and concerns for the future. I do want to just pause for a second. Educators, yeah, Ardo put it up there that Q&A box is open, so feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to keep asking my questions until I see some Q&A and some cues in the chat. So again, it is open. Educators, please ask away. We may actually get to my song question after all, which is really cool. So my next question for you all is, how do you balance truth telling with hope? So when we talked about kind of, your what excites you and what also makes you nervous, how do you balance that, particularly when dealing with stories that emerge from harm, erasure, or systemic injustice rather? How do you find that middle ground, or maybe it's not a middle ground, but how do you find the balance there? And Gord, let's start with you, and then we'll go Uma and then Charlene.
Oh, well, one thing I try to do is to highlight the victories that movements have achieved throughout history to counter the colonial narrative of the invasion of the Americas. For example, there's kind of two stories. Two versions. One is it was a mutually beneficial meeting between two worlds, and there was unfortunate disease epidemics, which minimizes the genocide, the warfare conducted by European colonial forces. And then on the other hand, there's a version where European colonial forces came in and just kind of steamrolled over indigenous people who were helpless victims. So my approach is to counter that, is to provide a more fuller history that includes the the colonial violence, but also the indigenous resistance and the victories that they achieved and the defeats they were able to inflict on European colonial forces. For example, the Mapuche in Chile were never conquered by the Spanish. And so to me, that's an important thing to know. And there's many other examples. And then that this resistance continues to this day is also important to be aware of. And when you're making a movement, besides having the history in that, it needs to be inspired. It needs to have a fighting spirit, and a culture of resistance is a really important part of that. And the history of resistance is an important part of the culture of resistance. So that's how I approach it, is to highlight the victories, the defeats of the colonial forces, or the defeats of the fascists, and the victories of anti-fascists.
That is absolutely brilliant, because I agree, there is hope and there is power in the resistance. So amazing. Uma, what about you?
Gord, that is absolutely inspirational. But I tend to come at it, because I write fiction, I come at it from a very narrow lens. I look at very child-sized situations and child-sized problems, and then I try to find little nuggets of real things that might have happened in one place or another, and I weave those into my fiction. For example, in I can't even remember which of the books it's in, and now it's either in Birds on the Brain or in the Sunshine Project. I think it's in Birds. There's a lady. Well, she's a character in all three books. She irons clothes for people who live in the apartment building, and she has a little booth at the bottom of one of the apartment buildings, and she, takes people, bring her their clothes right out of their laundry because they don't have dryers in most houses, and she will iron clothes for them. And she's been using an old coal iron and coughing a lot, and it's not good for her. She doesn't like to do it. And then the city decides they don't want any more coal irons anymore, and so she's got to get a permit she's got to change it to an electric iron. And I read somewhere that there was a kid in India who had invented, like a 14-year-old, who had invented a little ironing cart with a solar panel on top that would power an electric iron. And I thought, okay, I'm putting that in my story. So I always try to look for things like that, things that would can make small victories happen, because these are the little things that build in our lives, to make us want to affect change. So that's my approach. Sometimes I've done it with historical fiction, in one novel. I have a nonfiction book that I'm working on climate and migration. That's going to take a very different approach, certainly. But there is enough in the world to draw from, to make readers feel that change is possible.
I love that you infuse real versions of things into your fiction, because I think that makes for a meaningful read, and it allows students and children to grapple or to grab onto something, which is great. Charlene, what about you?
Yeah. So when I think of kind of personal examples of how truth telling relates to hope, from what I've seen is that from truth telling and kind of being honest with these really like intense and serious situations, a lot of the times they make you feel very intense emotions like anger, fear, sadness. And I think in sitting with those feelings and allowing them to kind of be present and acknowledging them, a lot of the times they sort of naturally turn into hope. I've had a lot of examples of attending sessions that are just platforms for conversation. So a lot of climate groups will do things where we'll just have climate conversations where people will kind of come into the same room and just talk about how scared we are, how fearful we are, and then that naturally sort of turns into anger and, people passionately saying, this isn't going to happen again. We're going to be the last. We're going to change these things about it. And I think, yeah, just giving that space for allowing people to feel their feelings. Like these are very intense subjects. A lot of the times we're dealing with things that are personal to people. So it's unrealistic and naive of us to kind of brush that off and say, forget about how you're feeling. Let's now work on the cause. Those real emotions can really help people foster sustainable movements and keep them working on something in a way that better represents them and also can help them do it for a longer period of time.
I love the idea of a climate conversation, which I think is brilliant. And I love this idea that it's in the anger, it's in having those conversations that we feel that hope, because then we're like, we can do something here. So
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. Everyone should be having climate conversations. If you're not, find a climate conversation group. Um, that's what we're taking away from this.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in quickly? I think
Please.
there, particularly with reference to climate, scientists are available and ready and willing to come into classrooms and talk to students about the work that they're doing on the front lines of this. People who are looking at, I don't know, everything from whale migration patterns and whale deaths and things like that to tree lines changing. And we have amazing science resources in Canada, and a lot of those folks are available in universities to come and talk to people.
That is incredibly generative. I love that, because educators are always looking for people to come and speak to their classes. And if scientists are ready, then find the scientists, because that's amazing. Amazing. Okay. So, what do you hope young people feel or understand after reading your books? And Gord, we're going to start with you, and then we'll go to Uma and then Charlene.
Well, I guess for the Antifa comic, I hope they understand, well, the history of fascism and the need to counter fascist movements through anti-fascist resistance, and that these movements represent a very real threat to large portions of the society. And if they're victorious and they're able to achieve their goal of taking power and using that position to impose their policies, it is a very dangerous situation. And that's the lesson of history. And that's why we need to challenge these movements today.
Agreed. I love this idea that like your comic is going to encourage students to challenge what they know and to challenge things that they know are just unjust. Uma, go ahead.
I would want my readers to know that their voices matter, that the things that they care about, those are important, and that they have the ability to speak up. Children don't get to vote, and so they don't see often the connection between what they think or feel and the direct impact of those opinions on the status quo. But they do have voices and they do have ideas, and they should use them.
And we should nurture those as
And we
educators.
should nurture those. Absolutely.
And Charlene, last one.
Yeah, with You Can Be an Activist, I'm hoping that after readers are able to kind of go through it, they feel excited and they feel organized. So our goal was to really create a clear guide. So once you've walked through it, you have some ideas and you've brainstormed causes that you're passionate about, way skills that you bring to the table, and direct actions that you can take. The goal is that they read it and they're thinking about their own lives as they do that. So I really hope that readers are able to understand that they can make impacts, and by breaking it down into very small and manageable steps, that the second they stop reading the book, they're like, great, let me get to work, let me see what I can do, and let me see how I can make an impact in my community.
Agreed. And I'm so excited about all of your books. They have been amazing reads. I am giving them to my kids after, I'm done with them now. And so it is actually time to wrap up. So I'm going to throw it back to Ardo. Again, thank you all for having us. This was amazing.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and talk as we adjust the screen. Thank you so much to our authors for being part of this panel conversation. And we learned so much. And I want to thank all of you for being here for this event. The recordings from the festival will be available to watch and rewatch until December 9th or until the end of the school year, depending on your pass. If you want copies of our festival titles, you can buy them through Tinlids, our official bookseller for schools and libraries. And of course, we have another library, a virtual one, in our virtual clubhouse. It is filled with resources such as our educator guide, which is very cool because there's pre and post activities that you can check out after watching a virtual event. But there's also the activity book as well as author videos and other bonus items. We have an exhibitor hall where right now we're actually asking classes to help us name the Fold Kids Book Fest monster. So if you have any kids who have really great name ideas, they can head over to the Fold Kids booth in the exhibit hall and be sure to complete the scavenger hunt. There's also a leaderboard so you can gain points by exploring the virtual clubhouse. And the more points you get, the better your chances are at winning prizes like a Fold Kids author visit. Lastly, share the love. This event is great. All of our events are great. So tell people about it. We love to see classes and families enjoying the event. So share your picture of you enjoying it or something that you've learned by using the hashtag FoldKids25. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.